jump right in and start exploring this platform. The URL for this platform is beta.clinepidb.org. And this is the new and improved version of ClinEpiDB. And this version is the platform that we released only last month. So let's start up here. This header has several drop-down menus. And if you want to learn a little bit more about our project, please check out this About page and the frequently asked questions. Under the Studies link, you will see a list of data sets, and these are all the data sets that we have released so far on this platform. Let's go in here and look at the study's summaries table. This gives you an overview of all the data sets that are released so far. We release new data sets and features every couple of months, so the site is constantly evolving. What you see in this table is that our site is flexible and accommodates different study designs, both observational and experimental. All the data sets that have been released on the platform so far are infectious disease related, but that is not at all a restriction by any means. In fact, we are working right now on dozens of data sets that focus on other domains, such as maternal and child health and family planning, and those will be released soon on this platform. So let's go back to the home page, and scrolling down, what you see is that every data set gets a study card. And this card lists a few key characteristics of the study. For our demos today, we will use the Demo1 case control data set. This looks at incidence and causes of severe diarrhea among children in several sites in Asia and Africa. And one of the reasons we are choosing this for our demo is that about 1,000 stool samples collected from participants in this study also have microbiome data available. And Dan will tell us about that later in the workshop. So I'm going to click on the title of the study to go to the dataset page. On the dataset page, you see the title of the study, and you see this diagram, and you see these tabs, and we're going to look at each of them in turn. We can call this, I'm going to give this a name, Navigating the Platform. So let's start with this dataset diagram up here. This dataset diagram tells us two things. It shows us the sample sizes, and it tells us the shape of the data. So for instance, you see here that there are over 22,000 participants in this data set. And we can see that there are the same number of households. So this tells us that there was one participant enrolled per household. We do see something here called household repeated measures. And what this is telling us is that there were variables that collected data about the household only once, and there were other variables that collected data about the household at more than one time point. So those are grouped under the repeated measures. Similarly, data was collected on participants, and in some cases, for some variables, participant data was collected at multiple time points. So let's do a quick poll, and can you look at the dataset diagram and tell us how many samples were collected in this data set? I'll give you a few more seconds to answer this.
Yeah, so far we have about 16 people have answered. Oh, I forget, you can see the results too.
Yes, I can see the results. All right, so I think, thank you for answering that poll. I'm going to click out of there. So the correct answer is 22,000 samples. So what this is telling us is that there was one sample collected per participant. And what you see under here is the participant repeated measures, variables that were collected multiple times on the participant, and these are household and household repeated measures. So the dataset diagram gives us a sense of how many samples were collected and at how many time points. So let's continue. Let's go on down here and move down to the first tab, which is called View Study Details. And in this tab is where you will find a wealth of information about this data set, all conveniently collected in one spot. So at the very top here, you can see a summary of the data set. Moving on down, there is a table of study characteristics. There are links to some of the major publications that come from the study. So you can just click and read them if you want to learn more about the data. Also, if we host data sets from related studies, we link to them here as well. Scrolling on down, you get a summary of the methods of this study and a map of the study sites. And you can learn how they defined cases and controls. Often study teams give us documents that they want to make publicly available, such as case report forms or code books, consent forms, and questionnaires. So you can look at them and download them right here. Those are all linked in this space as well. Scrolling down, you can see the list of people who led and conducted the study. And it is important to note that the study team always owns their data, even while it is hosted on ClinEpiDB, and they control access to their data. Finally, if users have requested to download this data set, then we have a table here with their name and the purpose for which they requested the data. So that is the study details page. Now, if I go up here, this table tells me that there are 594 variables in this data set. And if we go to the next tab, which is the Browse and Subset tab, we will be able to see each and every one of those variables. This page was designed for two things. The first is that you can see all the variables that were collected in this data set. And the second is that you can do univariate analysis and actually understand the distribution of each variable. At the top of this page, you see a box of featured variables. So this is where we pull out some of the variables that we think are going to be very useful or commonly used in analysis, such as whether the participant was a case or a control participant, age group, and country. So all those are collected up here in this featured variables box. There are two major types of variables, right? Numeric and categorical. So let's look at an example from each. Age is a good example of a numeric variable. It is a continuous variable and measured here in months. So numeric variables are displayed using a histogram like this. So this tells you the minimum, so 0 months, so babies were enrolled right at birth. The maximum is 62, so about 5 years. And we can adjust the binning if we want to. So I can change the binning here to say 6 months and see that there were over 11,000 participants between the ages of 6 and 12 months. So that's the sort of univariate analysis you can do for a numeric variable. Let's look at age group as an example of a categorical variable where the data are now grouped. And those we present using a frequency table and a bar graph. So here, for instance, you can see that 39% of participants were in the infant age group, which is 0 to 11 months. All of the variables that were collected in this data set are listed in a variable tree here on the right side. So you can expand it and collapse it. All the variables are in here. And they are organized in this hierarchy. So for instance, if I scroll up here, I can go in here and see that there was data collected on households that was related to dwelling characteristics and facilities and household water, hygiene, and so on. So if I click down here, I might be able to see that they collected information on how many sleeping rooms were in the dwellings that the participants lived in. What you will see up here is that we also give a definition of the variable. And we also here are telling you whether it was, how it was assessed at enrollment and so on. We also tell you the original variable name. So this is the variable name that was in the code book. So here the code book and the data set are all displayed here very conveniently. We give a label that's much more informative than the original variable name. And this is one of the ways in which ClinEpiDB is different from typical data repositories and makes it very easy to understand what is inside a data set. There are other terms that we call multi-filters. So this is an example of it. These are groups of related variables. Here they were asking about several cooking fuels and what cooking fuel was used in the participant's household. So if I scroll down, for instance, I see that wood was used as a cooking fuel in over 2/3 of the households in this study. Moving on down, if you were curious about what variables were collected at the sample level, we can scroll on down. And we see here that it was a stool sample, which of course makes sense for a diarrhea study, and that they did lab tests on these stool samples and looked for bacteria and parasites and viruses in the stool samples. So that's the sort of thing that you can see by clicking through this variable tree. You can also search for variables. So I can search for sex and look at sexes under demographics. 57% of the participants were male in this study. There were more boys than girls. So of course, there are hundreds of variables in this data set, and you can star your favorite variables if you want to make them more convenient to access. So I'm going to star a few variables here. And then what happens when I toggle this button? I only see the variables that I have. Let me remove this. So I only see the variables that I have starred. So this is a convenient way to collect variables that you're most interested in looking at. So what did we do here? We looked at a bunch of different variables, and in the next tab, we can start exploring some associations between them. So let's click over to visualize and make a new visualization. And what this opens up is a whole menu of tools. And these are some of the most common and useful plots that we use in epidemiology. We can try to make a simple bar plot. I'll choose bar plot, and it opens up a blank plot. Let's maybe plot age group as the main variable. What do we get? We get a bar plot with the 3 age groups. We can go on and stratify the bar plot if we wanted to. So we are introducing a second variable here, and I can toggle and choose sex. So here I'm plotting age group by sex. And what do we see here? We see that in every age group, there are more boys than girls. So that's something that's apparent from this stratified bar plot. What I can change here is count to proportion. And now what do we see? What we see now is that both girls and boys have a very similar distribution across age groups. So for both boys and girls, there's a higher proportion of participants in the 0 to 11 month age group than in the older age groups. So what did we just do in these last 10 minutes? In just a few clicks, we looked at a number of variables, we made a quick graph. So this was a tour of our workspace and a demo of some of the features where you can point and click and start exploring data. So having done this demo, I think it's your turn now to navigate the beta platform. So what we are going to share with you is this worksheet, and it's a structured exercise which you can try and work through. And this is actually a clickable PDF, so you can fill it in right as you write in the browser if you want to. So let me put a link in the chat to this